In 1983, the Soviet spacecraft Orbiter 4 makes a triumphant return to Earth. Cosmonauts Veshnyakov and Aberchenko, hailed as heroes, dream of returning to their normal lives. But an emergency occurs at the end of the journey, and communication with mission control is interrupted. At the same time, they realize something is attached to the ship, an alien life form. The next night, Orbiter 4 crashes in Kazakhstan. A witness finds the wreckage, one bloodied pilot with a shattered skull, and his companion undergoing something horrific. Days later in Moscow, a disciplinary hearing is held to decide the fate of neurophysiologist Tatiana. Known for her unconventional and experimental methods, she nearly killed a teenager during a procedure. The committee discusses whether to fire her or hand the case over to the prosecutor's office, but Tatiana refuses to admit guilt. Soon, KGB Colonel Semiradov approaches her with a proposal. He informs her that the Orbiter 4 cosmonauts have returned, but the signal was lost 24 hours before landing. An accident is suspected, but the sole survivor, Veshnyakov, suffers from amnesia. Semiradov promises to erase Tatiana's legal problems if she agrees to cooperate. She accepts and is taken to a top-secret military base. Upon arrival, she receives a briefing on the situation and her role. Shortly after, she observes the head doctor, Rigel, attempting to hypnotize Veshnyakov, but the cosmonaut resists. Determined to evaluate him herself, Tatiana conducts subtle experiments and concludes that he is not insane, but exhibits extreme anxiety and sensory loss, holding a boiling hot glass without reacting. Given the prison-like conditions of the base, Tatiana finds this response understandable and decides to return to Moscow. Semiradov agrees but asks her to spend the night, claiming a lack of transport. That night, Tatiana takes a bath and a sedative but cannot sleep. She decides to go for a run around the base. Suddenly, she encounters an aggressive prisoner who blocks her path, frightening her. Another inmate intervenes and tells her to return to her room before something bad happens. Back in her room, she receives an unexpected visit from Semiradov. The colonel invites her to a nighttime observation of Veshnyakov. Before they begin, he asks her when she last ate, aware that what she is about to see might induce nausea. He watches the time carefully and orders the cosmonauts' complete isolation. The room is sealed with reinforced glass and steel locks. Tatiana doesn't understand why. The nighttime observation is completely different from the daytime one. The room is filled with armed soldiers, as if something terrible is about to happen. Minutes later, she understands. Veshnyakov's body begins to writhe violently until he collapses to the floor. He vomits, but that's not the worst of it. An alien organism emerges from his body, leaving Tatiana in shock. During the day, Veshnyakov appears to be a normal, healthy man, but at night, he loses consciousness and a humanoid alien creature emerges from within him. They share a symbiotic bond, completely dependent on one another. Fascinated by the phenomenon, Tatiana moves closer to get a better look at the being. The mysterious alien, with several pairs of eyes, reacts aggressively, lunging at the reinforced glass. Frightened, she backs away, trying to understand what she has just witnessed and what to do next. Colonel Semiradov follows her and reveals more about the symbiot. He explains that Veshnyakov is unaware of the creature inside him because it doesn't harm him. He presents her with two options: sign a non-disclosure agreement and return to Moscow, or stay and try to separate the cosmonaut from his alien passenger. He also mentions that the second cosmonaut died heroically, but does not reveal the details. In the end, Tatiana agrees to continue her work, but demands full access to all previous documents and information about Veshnyakov. She discovers that after the landing, Veshnyakov was admitted to a rehabilitation clinic. That same night, the symbiot appeared for the first time and brutally killed the doctor. For security reasons, Veshnyakov was then transferred to the secret military base, but to this day they haven't found a way to separate him from the creature. Tatiana is known for her innovative approach, and the Colonel believes she can find a solution in the name of scientific progress. At the same time, it becomes clear that the symbiote is keeping Veshnyakov alive. Without it, his health rapidly deteriorates. Likewise, the alien cannot survive without the cosmonaut. It uses Veshnyakov's body as a living spacesuit, capable of regeneration and possessing extraordinary physical abilities. Tatiana begins a detailed study of Veshnyakov and the organism living inside him. She analyzes all available recordings and takes meticulous notes to help the cosmonaut. Seeking support, she approaches Dr. Rigel, but he completely ignores her, believing she wants to steal his position. Tatiana assures him she has no interest in any Nobel Prize. She only wants to understand how the symbiote feeds. Rigel evasively replies that the creature consumes what the cosmonaut eats, but Tatiana remains suspicious. At the same time, she decides to fulfill Veshniakov's request to contact his mother and find his son, who was placed in an orphanage. In their next encounter, Tatiana deliberately provokes Veshnyakov. She tells him he is crazy and that he killed the second pilot, which is why he's locked up in a military base. She claims he can never live among normal people as he is a threat. She goes further, accusing him of being a terrible father. She blames him for abandoning his newborn son before the mission, insinuating he did it to protect his own career. She even scoffs at his Hero of the Soviet Union title, saying that going to space is neither extraordinary nor truly heroic. Her words enrage Veshnyakov, provoking an intense reaction of anger and aggression, exactly what Tatiana wanted. She intends to analyze his hormonal response to stress to understand what the symbiote feeds on. Rigel strongly opposes her methods, but Tatiana and the Colonel ignore his protests. They argue that science and progress demand sacrifices. Tatiana also insists that Veshnyakov be removed from the security cell and placed in more humane conditions. She argues that during the day he poses no threat and should be able to interact with the team outside the reinforced glass. This, she believes, will allow for richer observation. Semiradov agrees, convinced that Tatiana is the only one capable of achieving real results. Veshnyakov is moved to a room where he finds an old television. Fiddling with the set, he manages to get the news. To his surprise, the news reports that the mission was a success, with both pilots returning safely. The anchor announces that the astronauts are in a 3-week quarantine before resuming their normal lives. Suddenly, Veshnyakov feels a strong sense of disorientation as the reality of his situation begins to sink in. Shortly after, Tatiana visits him and apologizes for the stress she caused, explaining her reasons. However, she refuses to reveal the true reason for his confinement, but promises to do everything in her power to help him. In response, Veshnyakov confesses that he never knew about his son's existence, but now that he does, he vows to get him out of the orphanage. At night, Tatiana tries to establish contact with the symbiote and returns to the armored glass. She gets its attention and performs some movements, realizing the creature is mimicking her actions. Observing from a distance, Rigel constantly interrupts, which greatly irritates Tatiana. At one point, she asks him to stop interfering and accidentally knocks over a roly-poly toy. The symbiote reacts to the toy, and Tatiana notices a pattern. Determined to take a bold step, she asks for the armored glass to be opened so she can communicate with the creature up close. The team equips her with a protective suit and retreats to a safe distance. Tatiana enters the room and hands the toy to the symbiote, but at one point she stumbles, provoking the creature. It attacks her, injuring her leg, and then tries to prevent her from leaving the room. The Colonel reacts immediately and does everything possible to save Tatiana. Shortly after, he enters the room himself to confront the symbiote directly. Later, the Colonel visits Tatiana to check if she is okay. The doctor concludes that the symbiote and Veshnyakov share the same memory and consciousness. Furthermore, each night, the time the symbiote spends outside the astronaut's body increases by a few minutes. She doesn't rule out the possibility that the creature might soon be able to survive without a host, but she doesn't know what the consequences would be. Semiradov asks her not to focus on that and to do everything possible to help the astronaut. Every day, he sends false reports just to ensure Veshnyakov isn't executed as a potential threat. For the colonel, science and medicine only advance with bold experiments, so they cannot stop now. While reviewing the recordings, Tatiana realizes that part of the footage was deliberately cut. She notices that Veshnyakov's condition worsens at night, but improves in the morning, indicating that he and the symbiote are feeding on something. Rigel tries to cover this up, claiming technical failures and data errors, but Tatiana demands full access to the materials. Rigel reluctantly agrees, realizing that only with her help can he win a Nobel Prize. He asks Tatiana to be ready for a night excursion and promises to take her to a restricted area. That night, Rigel hides Tatiana in a vehicle and heads to the restricted perimeter, leaving her with night vision binoculars. The doctor then goes to a cage where armed soldiers are gathered. They pull a prisoner from a truck, tie him up, and throw him into the cage. A few minutes later, it becomes clear that to keep the alien alive, they are feeding it people. After sneaking into the cage and scaring the victim, the symbiote decapitates him, leaving Tatiana in shock. Afterward, Rigel informs her that they tried using rats, pigs, and other animals as a food source, but it didn't work. The symbiote feeds exclusively on humans, likely due to the cortisol the human brain produces when afraid. Tatiana is horrified and condemns this method of sustenance, but cannot suggest an alternative. The next morning, she organizes a short run for Veshnyakov around the building. With no cameras or microphones, she decides to tell him the truth. She confesses that they are keeping him there because of the symbiote inside him, which is killing people. Veshnyakov is stunned and asks to meet her that night to try to find a solution. At night, the astronaut is supposed to take a sedative to prevent the symbiote's interference. However, he spits out the pill and invites the nurse into his room. He puts the sedative in her tea, disables the surveillance, and escapes. Meeting up with Tatiana, Veshnyakov turns off the security camera so they can break into the medical wing where the second surviving pilot is supposedly hidden. There, the astronaut finally admits he knows about his companion living inside him. He feels the alien's presence. He sees when it kills people and shares memories with it. Veshnyakov never told the colonel because he knows he would be isolated forever with no chance of returning to a normal life. The news said that after a 3-week quarantine, the astronauts would be released, and he begs her for 2 more weeks, asking her to keep his secret. Tatiana is horrified by Veshnyakov's cruelty, knowing more people will die in that time. To her, he has become a monster. Unwilling to help him, the doctor flees. Tatiana decides to return to her room, but is stopped by armed soldiers. Upon finding the colonel, she discovers his true goal is not to save Veshnyakov, but to separate the alien from the astronaut to use the symbiote as a biological weapon. Tatiana condemns the colonel's methods, as they are killing people to feed the symbiote. Semiradov reveals that the creature's food is not just ordinary humans, but death row prisoners who committed horrific crimes and deserve their fate. He admits he was wrong to hide the truth, but says he needs Tatiana. Only she can achieve the necessary results. Realizing there are no more secrets between them, Tatiana and the colonel decide to continue their collaboration. The next night, they decide to observe the next feeding. During the event, the symbiote tries to intimidate the prisoner. Tatiana tries to save the potential victim and asks to enter the cage with the alien. Feeling no fear, she sings Veshnyakhov's favorite song, which causes the symbiote not to attack her. It seems she has managed to calm the creature, but as soon as the prisoner tries to flee, the symbiote attacks and brutally kills him. Rigel observes that the creature is adapting to life on Earth and has developed hearing. At the same time, it becomes clear that Veshnyakov and the symbiote are connected more deeply than imagined. Semiradov proposes starting over from scratch and promises Tatiana all the resources she needs. If anyone discovers the experiments, the colonel will take full responsibility, so the doctor doesn't have to fear the consequences. Tatiana agrees, but realizes they have different goals. She wants to save Veshnyakov, while the colonel wants him to learn to control the symbiot and turn it into a weapon. Tatiana conducts a series of studies and discovers why the symbiot chose Veshnyakov. It turns out the pilot had a hormonal imbalance caused by the early stages of cancer, which blocked cortisol production. This observation leads to another important conclusion. The hormonal imbalance can be used to separate the alien from its host. Tatiana proposes a joint escape with Rigel, arguing they are scientists, not criminals or murderers. Rigel hesitates but eventually agrees to help with the plan. Tatiana attacks a soldier, injects him with a sedative, and puts him to sleep. She then runs to Veshnyakov and tells him her plan. She can induce a temporary hormonal imbalance that will cause the symbiont to reject its host. Since it cannot survive outside the body for more than a few hours, she needs to get Veshnyakov to the nearest hospital in that time. The astronaut completely rejects the plan, afraid of the consequences. He knows the monster can hurt people and fears what might happen. Tatiana hugs him tightly, making it clear she loves him and will do everything to save him. Trusting her, Veshnyakov agrees to escape. Rigel helps them but refuses to go with them. The doctor has his own plans. He leaves the pair and runs to the colonel's office, where he leaks secret information to superiors. Some soldiers discover Rigel and sound the alarm. Semiradov bursts into the office and executes Rigel for betraying his objectives. The colonel orders a special team to capture Veshnyakov and Tatiana. He forbids shooting the astronaut, but authorizes the execution of the woman, calling her a traitor. Soon, the soldiers catch up to the couple and open fire, wounding Tatiana as Veshnyakov tries to protect her. Veshnyakov asks for a syringe and injects himself, triggering the hormonal imbalance. He releases the symbiont, which quickly eliminates the armed group. Meanwhile, Tatiana drives as fast as she can to get Veshnyakov out of there, ignoring barricades and gunfire. Semiradov comes out to confront them and shoots the symbiont, wounding it in the arm. At the same time, Veshnyakov's condition rapidly worsens. Tatiana realizes her mistake. The astronaut and the creature are too connected to survive separately. She stops the car and allows the colonel to catch up. She then declares she is willing to cooperate. Semiradov refuses to work with a traitor and wounds her, which enrages Veshnyakov. Taking control of the symbiont, he orders the creature to kill the soldiers and the colonel. After eliminating all threats against Tatiana, the alien returns to Veshniakov's body and heals him. Tatiana promises to do everything possible to save the man she loves, but he has already made his decision. Veshnyakov uses the colonel's gun to take his own life, along with the symbiont, putting an end to the tragedy. Sometime later, in memory of her beloved, Tatiana finds the orphanage where Veshnyakov's son is. She goes there with the intention of adopting the child.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.